Dear students, in this video we will discuss about Lotka-Volterra equations. This equation is about biological interaction in ecosystem. When two species live in a same environment and sharing same resources such as food, space, etc., they have an impact on each other's growth. To analyze their impact level, Lotka-Volterra developed mathematical equation. They derived this equation independently. Lotka 1925 in USA and Volterra 1926 in Italy. Now, Lotka-Volterra derived two equations. Here, we are concerned non-predatory competition. Second important point to be remembered, this equation is based on logistic curve, where carrying capacity controls the growth of a population. So for species 1, in the absence of species 2, the equation will be dn1 upon dt is equal to small r n1 in the bracket k1 minus n1 upon k1, where the n is stands for the population size, t for the time, small r intrinsic capacity for the increase of species, and k carrying capacity for species. dn1 upon dt is change in population size for species 1 in absence of the species 2. Same equation we can create for the species 2. dn2 upon dt is equal to r n2 in the bracket k2 minus n2 upon k2. K is a carrying capacity which is having the great impact in Lotka-Volterra equation. Suppose in an habitat, species 1 has highest utilization rate, and due to carrying capacity of habitat, only 16 individuals can be exist here. Another side, in same habitat, species 2 uses much less resources for the individual, and 64 individuals can be supported. Now, this is situation in the presence of single species only. But in a habitat, more than one species lives. So, when these two species whose requirements are overlapping will live together, then how will they survive? In this condition, species 2 does not utilize exactly the same amount of resources of species 1. Same with species 1, which utilizes much amount of resources as species 2 does. We need a factor to convert species 2 individuals into an equivalent number of species 1 individuals. So, to know growth rate of any species in the presence of other species, this factor must be multiplied by the number of individual of particular species to get equivalent number of species. These factors are alpha and beta. If the impact of species 2 on the species 1, it will called as a alpha 1 2, and the impact of species 1 on species 2 will called as a beta 2 1. These impact or the factor must be multiplied by the number of concerned species to equalize the number of particular species. Now, when we will do this kind of the conversion, then the new equation by the Lotka-Volterra is dn1 upon dt is equal to r n1 in the bracket k1 minus n1 minus alpha N2 upon K1. Minus alpha N2 is the equivalent number of species one individual. Now same thing we will do with the species 2, where we will get dN2 upon dt is equal to R N2 K2 minus N2 minus beta N1 upon K2. Important part of the Lotka-Volterra equation from where so many questions are asking is from the graph. In the graph, we have to find out the isocline situation when rate of change will be 0. Isocline situation when the rate of change will be 0, then we will get the new equation K1 minus N1 minus alpha N2 is equal to 0. Now when we will solve this equation, then there would be the N1 is equal to K1 minus alpha N2. Now because isocline situation the rate of change is 0, suppose the species 1 individual is absent, then what would be happen? K1 is equal to alpha N2. So carrying capacity for the first one will be equivalent to the alpha N2. Now what would be the number of the N2? The N2 number will be K1 upon alpha by solving this equation. Now let's plot a graph and see why we are calculating these things and where these things will be utilized. In the graph x-axis we are having the population size of species 1, y-axis population size of species 2. Now there is a 0 to K1 is a size of the species 1 and 0 to K1 upon alpha will be the size of the species 2. This K1 upon alpha we have taken from here. When we will plot a graph, zero isocline situation will be here. What is the meaning of the zero isocline situation? Below the zero isocline situation, we are seeing here the left to the right, the population size of the species will increase. It will increase fast in an early stage and then the growth will be slower. If the population size will be beyond to the zero isocline situation, then the size of the population will be decreased. The interpretation of this graph is important here. Now for the species 2, the equation is dN2 upon dt is equal to R N2 in the bracket K2 minus N2 minus beta N1 upon K2. Now when we will plot the graph for this equation, then we will get the K2 upon beta will be the size of the population of species 1 and K2 will be the population size of species 2. When we will plot the zero isocline, then this kind of the graph we will get. The meaning of the graph and the interpretation will be like this. Below the zero isocline, the growth of the population species 2 will be this, and above the zero isocline, the decline of the population species 2 will be shown in the black arrows. Now the K2 upon beta we will get from the same manner as we got the K1 upon alpha for species 1. Now but in the case of any ecosystem, the two species live together. When these two species will live together, then what would be happen when they will compete with each other? This kind of the graph we will get where K1 is greater than K2 upon beta as we are seeing, and K1 upon alpha is greater than K2. In this situation, the N1 species wins. the question is asking from this situation. In another situation where the K2 upon beta is greater than K1 and K2 is greater than K1 upon alpha, the N2 species wins. So these two graph interpretation where N1 wins and N2 wins. Now, stable equilibrium can be there in ecosystem, and when the stable equilibrium will be there, then K2 upon beta will be greater than the K1 and K1 upon alpha is greater than the K2. Now, unstable equilibrium may also there. In the unstable equilibrium, the K1 is greater than K2 upon beta and K2 is greater than K1 upon alpha, which we are seeing here, and unstable equilibrium can be there in ecosystem. Now, on the basis of the Lotka-Volterra equation and these information, so many questions are asking in competitive examination. One of the question is the diagram represents competition between species 1 and species 2 according to Lotka-Volterra model of a competition. Given the condition in the diagram, the predicted outcome of competition is first, unstable coexistence between species 1 and species 2 because K1 is greater than K2 upon beta and K2 is greater than K1 upon alpha. Second, unstable coexistence between species 1 and species 2 because K1 is less than K2 upon beta and K2 is less than K1 upon alpha. Third, stable coexistence between species 1 and species 2 because K1 is greater than K2 upon beta and K2 is greater than K1 upon alpha. And fourth, stable coexistence between species 1 and species 2 because K1 is smaller than K2 upon beta and K2 is smaller than K1 upon alpha. You have to see graph very carefully. This graph is just the replica of unstable equilibrium which we have solved in the last presentation. So what would be the answer? The answer would be the first, unstable coexistence between species 1 and species 2 because K1 is greater than K2 upon beta and K2 is greater than K1 upon alpha. Thanks for watching. For more information, subscribe, like and share this channel. Thank you.